As part of the Santa Maria Public Library series, Book to Action, How to Spot the Facts, we were joined by author Cindy Otis. The Book to Action grant is a project which is supported in whole or in part by the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services under the provisions of the Library Services and Technology Act, administered in California by the State Librarian. Cindy Otis is a tech executive and internationally recognized expert on disinformation, threat analysis, and counter-messaging. Prior to joining the private sector in 2017, she served in the CIA as a military analyst, intelligence briefer, and a manager in the Directorate of Intelligence. She is the author of the critically acclaimed book, True or False, a CIA Analyst Guide to Spotting Fake News. Cindy is a frequent media commentator and writes regularly about disinformation and national security issues, often cited by publications such as The Washington Post, New York Times, BBC, NPR, and CNN. We are pleased and honored to be joined by Cindy Otis at the Santa Maria Public Library.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you so much to the Santa Maria Public Library for their incredible work on building community resources on this really important topic, and also to the state of California that brought us sort of all together today. I'm super excited to be here. Really excited to be here to talk about this issue of how we all can be active participants in spotting the truth online. I think, as younger folks, you're living in a really, really interesting time. Not to sound like an old person, but when I was a teen, the internet was just starting to be a thing that everyone had in their homes. And it was actually, you could actually know the number of websites that there were online at the time. And nowadays we have just billions and billions of pieces of content flying around, videos and pictures and images and text and all of that. And, you're just living in a very different time than I was when I was a teen. And so it makes this topic, I think, really, really crucial. All right, well, I can talk about myself for a minute. Okay, so a couple of things to know about me. Jen mentioned some of the things. So I spent 10 years working at the CIA in the part that does what's called intelligence analysis. And that's the part of the intelligence community that receives all of the intelligence, the information, the reports from all over the world. And they are responsible for combing through just that massive amount of information that comes in every day and using things like their geographic expertise, their language expertise, their knowledge of politics and things like that. They help policymakers in the government understand what's happening all around the world. And so it's a really, really critical role. And through that job, I learned some really important skills that I talk about in my book about how to deal with that vast amount of information and find the truth of what's actually happening. Because for a lot of different reasons, among that information and intelligence and things that analysts are looking at, is a lot of false information too, or misleading information. And so analysts are supposed to look at, okay, what of that is actually true? So it's a really tough job. It's also really exciting. So I spent 10 years doing that. And then when I left the agency, I went into the private sector, and I've been working in technology ever since, and especially within social media on the issue of what's called disinformation and misinformation. Now, a couple of other little pieces about me. You'll see the two most important little people in my life, and those are my dogs. Lily is the brown and white one, Dash is the white and black one. And I always joke with them that they're like super spreaders of false information because they're constantly barking at things that aren't real or aren't actually happening, that they think they hear and they see on the street. So got to show them off. And then I'm also an author, as Jen mentioned, which is why we're all here. I think a lot of you maybe have already gotten a copy of True or False, or you've maybe even already read it. That was my first book. And I actually have my next book coming out next year, and it's actually fiction. It's a young adult novel about a small upstate New York town in the area that I'm actually originally from that deals with a conspiracy theory taking over their town. So that comes out next year with Scholastic, and I'm really excited about that. So on the side, I get to do author things, which is a lot of fun for me. Awesome. Okay, so to get started, I wanted to talk about two categories of things that you might see online that are different kinds of false information. So why does false information or even lies spread online? So sometimes it's intentional. And when a falsehood is spread online intentionally, meaning the person or the group or the organization knows that it's false and they're intentionally spreading it, we call that disinformation. So why would somebody or an organization or a group, why would they push something online that they know is false? Well, it's for a couple of different reasons, and I'll just highlight a few of them. So one, don't get any ideas from this, but actually spreading lies online can be really financially profitable if you know how to do it. You can set up websites. You can get money for hosting ads on websites. You can get followers. You can set up Patreon accounts, and lies that are believable and that are emotional or cause certain reactions in folks can become really popular, and people have learned really quickly about how to turn that popularity into cash. Again, don't take any lessons from this, please. Don't take any inspiration. Lies can also be really powerful and can also get people a lot of followers, a lot of spotlight, a lot of attention publicly. If you spread certain kind of falsehoods and they go viral, you can get followers, you can get clicks, you can get likes. And that kind of attention, that kind of popularity can be really addictive sometimes. It also can, one of the reasons why we see so many lies in political situations is that spreading lies about certain political topics can also win you votes, can also get you followers that way. And so it's a really big political issue too. But the vast majority of false stuff that we see online these days is actually stuff that's spread unintentionally. So people don't understand or know that what they're saying or they're spreading is misleading or false, and they share it. And in that category, we call that misinformation. So unintentionally spreading falsehoods. Well, why would we unintentionally spread falsehoods? Why wouldn't we just sort of be able to spot it right away and say, oh, okay, this isn't true, I'm not going to share it? Well, again, for a lot of reasons. So like I was saying earlier, there's just a huge amount of information online these days. You can be on so many different social media platforms. There's so many different news outlets. There's so many different websites. It's just endless. You can try to hunt down the entire internet in a lifetime. You will never make it. There's just so much information. And so that waterfall of information, or that fire hose that we're all constantly under every single day of information, can feel really, really overwhelming. And it makes us less likely or even exhausted by the prospect of having to fact check or investigate or research every single piece of content we see. We just feel really overwhelmed with it. Another reason why it can spread online is because lies or falsehoods, that is, can spread online is because online is kind of like a game of telephone. I don't know if kids actually play that game these days anymore, but the idea of this game is that you line up in a row of people and one person whispers a certain message to the next person, into the ear of the next person. And it might be something like, I like waffles. And then the next person, they only get one chance to say it, right? If the person who follows didn't hear them say, I like waffles, and they thought they heard them say, I like rockets, they then take that message and they whisper it to the next person. And what inevitably happens every single time is that when you started with I like waffles, by the end of this chain of people, it's morphed into something completely different, like, my cat ran across the road. That actually happens on social media and online very, very easily because we're all seeing information, we interpret that information, we give it our opinion, and then we share it. And the thing that we started with towards the end ends up being really, really different than what we started with. And then the other reason, and this is both the case for disinformation and misinformation, is that we are human beings and we're emotional creatures, right? We feel things. Disinformation and misinformation often are written in ways or said in ways to spark particularly strong emotions, especially of fear or anger, because when our brains are confronted with really powerful emotions, things like, you should be afraid of this, you should be really angry about this, our brains sort of shut down, and those critical thinking skills we might have learned in school, they sort of turn off. We're so focused on feeling that fear, that anger really powerfully that we don't stop and think, okay, is the thing that I'm actually seeing or hearing really true? We just have that feeling. And so we'll share things that end up not being true. So those are some of the reasons why falsehoods spread online. There are lots of others, and I'll walk through some examples of things you might have seen recently, and we'll talk about them. So in my book is sort of set up, if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, is set up into two different sort of areas. So the first is I cover the history of fake news. So spoiler alert, if you haven't had a chance to read the book yet, fake news is actually not a new phenomenon. Using falsehoods and lies to achieve certain things is not actually new. And I cover a couple of well-known historical examples that you might have learned about in school already. I won't go too much into them because there are actually whole chapters that include these that you can read about. But one of them is in that first picture of showing sort of a grisly, gruesome murder in a cartoon, is from 1888 in industrial London, in which this infamous murderer went on a killing spree. And rumors and lies and claims were just running rampant. The whole city was taken up with this murderer running around killing women. And people were making claims about, oh, I think the murderer was my neighbor. I think it was this person. There was just a ton of speculation. And the newspapers at the time covered it all every single day as front page stories, because the whole city was gripped with it. And a lot of what we know and what we actually don't know about the murderer, the murderer has never been found. He's called Jack the Ripper. We still don't know who the murderer was, but a lot of that is because there were so many lies and falsehoods and rumors spreading at that time that we don't actually know what was true and what was false, and what evidence was real. The second example is from 18th century France, pre-Revolutionary War, or pre-Revolution France, when Marie Antoinette became Queen of France, and there was a popular little published kind of print called a libelle, which was, the translation is roughly offensive work, and it was kind of like a celebrity gossip website nowadays, where you might find, things that are true about celebrities, you might find things that are rumors or false, and these were written about Marie Antoinette and the monarchy. And it did include a lot of true information about how the monarchy was spending just a huge amount of money every day when the poor were getting poorer in France. But it also included a lot of lies about her. And a lot of the things that we think we know today about Marie Antoinette actually are not true, and they came from those libelles. So the lies in these two examples have really, really affected what we still know and don't know about these two examples today. And then the other one is kind of a fun one. There was a newspaper that printed a series of articles that they claimed was from a scientific journal. This was in 1835, and back then we didn't have things like people going to the moon and spaceships and all of that. And there was a lot of sort of scientific discovery happening at that point. And the series of articles claimed to be the findings of a very prominent astronomer who supposedly in these articles said that little fantastical creatures like Batmen and sort of aliens and mythical creatures lived on the moon. And people believed it because they didn't have a way of verifying and checking. It later came out that these articles were a hoax. But for a while, people actually did think there were these little flying Batmen roving the moon. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about a couple of more recent examples, and maybe you'll see some similarities in some of the historical examples and what we've seen today. So false information these days can look a lot like what I have on the screen. So one is a website that says it's a Christian Times newspaper, and it published an article in 2016 claiming that some fraudulent votes for the presidential election were found in a warehouse in Ohio. Now, I'll just say straight up, this was entirely fabricated, but let me give you the story. So a young man graduated from college, and like a lot of young people, including myself back in the day, graduated with a lot of student loan debt, and he was very worried about how he was going to pay it off. Meanwhile, the presidential election was happening. He had a particular candidate that he supported. He had a political party that he was part of. And he heard the candidate, who at the time was Donald Trump, who became president eventually, say that if he lost the election, that it would be because the election was rigged against him. And so this really rather enterprising young man decided to create his own news website that he could make some money from and also help his preferred candidate. So he wrote a story in about 20 to 40 minutes from his kitchen. He photoshopped this picture on the screen showing a man standing in front of ballot boxes, and he came up with this total story from start to finish. It was false, claiming that these fraudulent votes had been found in a warehouse. Well, this website and this article in particular went absolutely viral. People believed it. And actually today, still, even though the website has been taken down and the person was found out, and there were articles written about this man who fabricated these stories, screenshots of this article actually still appear online, as if people truly believe that it's true still. But it was fabricated, and there were a couple of signs that if people like me and you were looking at this article, there were a couple of signs that would show us right away that this was actually not true and not an actual legitimate website. So even though he named this website something that sounded like a newspaper, if you actually look really closely in the picture, you can see where it usually has the name of an author. So if I wrote this article, it'd say by Cindy Otis, it actually says by admin one. So admin one is not a person. It is what is automatically populated when you quickly put up a website. And so that would have been indication number one that this probably wasn't a legitimate news site. The second example is a website that ended up spoofing the CNN news website. So they basically copied the look of the CNN website, and they put up a fake story claiming that someone was going around Walmart and injecting bananas with the HIV virus. And this too went viral, and it actually, this same kind of story, this fabricated story comes out in various forms. Sometimes it's oranges, sometimes it's bananas again, sometimes it's other fruit, claiming that that fruit is being poisoned, and therefore people are being poisoned. And it gained a lot of traction when it came out because it looked like the CNN website. Well, if again, me and you decided to take a more critical eye and do a little bit of investigating and looking at this website, there are a couple of things that we would notice. One, the evidence is just the look of this banana, right? Maybe if we knew something about fruit, we would know sort of automatically this sometimes happens to bananas. It's not a big deal, that sort of thing. But the other really big thing, you don't have to be a fruit expert to spot this, is that the bar at the top of the website for CNN just has CNN about health, national news, strange news, and videos. That's not the normal heading for the CNN website. We could have gone to CNN.com and compared the two websites, and we would have seen that difference. All right, so that's what some false news websites might look like. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right. So here's another example. So we'll keep the girl's name out of it because we don't want to embarrass her, even though it was printed in news. But there was a a girl who was on a family trip in North Carolina. And while she was there, she was on her TikTok just looking around, and up in her feed popped this amazing video showing apparently Gastonia, North Carolina. And from the pictures, it looks like quite a magical place, like it might be in a picture book or something like that, or I don't know, even in like a Marvel movie or something. It just looks beautiful, right? And so while she was there, she was like, "Oh my gosh, like let's drive a couple of hours to this part of Gastonia, or this part of North Carolina called Gastonia, and see this incredible scene of mountains and villages and cute little houses. We're so close. Let's do it." Well, there was something in the caption of the video that might have told her this isn't Gastonia, North Carolina. I have a giant blue arrow pointing to it. If you can see on your screen, it says hashtag Gastonia, hashtag North Carolina, hashtag Switzerland. All right, so let's go to the next slide and see what Gastonia, North Carolina actually looks like. There it is. So I don't know if anyone's ever been to North Carolina. It doesn't look like that beautiful scenery of, Swiss chalets and mountains. This is actually what it looks like, and it's a cute little town, but it's definitely not what she was expecting. And so when she pulled up with her family to see this beautiful landscape, instead she saw a lot of gas stations, a lot of strip malls, and was pretty disappointed. It turned out, of course, that the video that was posted was not at all Gastonia, North Carolina, and she learned her lesson. So one quick way she could have checked before going on this rather disappointing road trip, I think, for her, is just to Google. I found this picture just from typing in Gastonia, North Carolina. I didn't actually know what it looked like myself when I was reading this story, and this is one of the pictures. So a really quick thing that would have solved her and her family a couple of hours of inconvenience and a little bit of a disappointing end. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so I'll go through sort of one more big example because it's on a topic that we're seeing a lot of in the news, and I think it's really important to look at, since it's a topic that is generating a lot of discussion and a lot of information, how some falsehoods are spreading about this topic. So a couple of months ago now, when Russia invaded Ukraine, right away, and even before that, a lot of lies were spreading online. Now, if you've read True or False, you know that I actually spend a lot of time talking about how Russia uses falsehoods and lies online to advance their foreign policy and their political agenda, both at home and abroad. So before they invaded, they started building up their military along the border with Ukraine. And at the time, they were already starting to say, "We're not doing anything. We're not on the border. Oh, it's for exercises. We're not going to invade." Up until they actually invaded, they were saying, "There's nothing to see here. We're not doing anything," even though we could clearly see their military growing by the tens of thousands every day. When they invaded, when they actually crossed over the border, they started to change the lie. The lie became, "We're not doing anything bad. It's just a special operation. We're just coming to do some peacekeeping. Everything's fine. We're not coming to take over Ukraine." Well, if you've been following the news, you know that their military has taken over whole parts of Ukraine now. They've bombed almost every city in the country. Thousands of people have been killed. But they continue to push lies and falsehoods about what they're actually doing there. And it's part of their strategy to use lies as a way of pushing the attention onto something else, to deflecting from what they're doing, to hide deflecting from what they're doing, to point the finger at other people, and to avoid blame for what they're doing. So one of the things that the Russian government has done, and they have a really big controlling stake in Russian media outlets, so they can dictate what gets covered in the news and what doesn't. So one of the things that they have been pushing is a lot of different stories saying that they're actually not hurting Ukrainians and that Ukrainians are actually faking the instances in which they say their people are being killed. And some of the lies that they're using involve things like fake pictures, videos that they've taken from other places, and that sort of thing. So in this instance that I have on the screen, some accounts were posting on social media that this video of these two individuals getting war makeup put on. And they said, look, they're staging deaths. People aren't actually dying. They're actors. They're paid actors, and they're putting, they're getting makeup on to then, eventually take pictures or video to say, for Ukraine to say, look, these people have been killed, but these are actually paid actors. Well, some investigating by Reuters and some other fact-checking organizations showed that actually this video that they said was evidence is actually a video taken of a movie set. A Ukrainian movie was being filmed quite some time ago. And these were, in fact, actors, but it was when the video was being filmed before this conflict, long before this conflict. So that video was taken out of context and used then as a lie. Let's go to the next. All right, so keeping in that same theme of the kinds of claims that the Russian government is making about Ukraine, so on the platform Telegram, there was this video that appeared showing people with dummies dressed up as soldiers, and they were saying, look, this is evidence that the pictures of people who have died in the war, Ukrainians who have been killed in the war, is actually, again, staged, and these are actually dummies being used. But, and this comes from my friends, the News Literacy Project, this, again, was a video taken from a Russian TV series that was filmed earlier. It wasn't actually about this conflict. But again, accounts from Russia were saying that this was evidence that Ukraine was lying, when in fact, this is these accounts lying. And then this second one is there was a video that was circulating, and this one is actually still up on Facebook. It has 124,000 likes already and 302,000 shares, still up there on Facebook. This is a video in which it shows a row of people who they said were, again, paid actors in body bags, and the video shows people under these bags actually moving. And so they were saying, look, these are actors. Ukrainians aren't actually being killed. Ukraine's, lying and saying that that their people are being killed, but this is totally staged. Well, this video was actually taken from a demonstration against climate change inaction in Austria. It has nothing to do with Ukraine. It was taken before the conflict started. But again, the Russians use this lie to suggest that what is happening in Ukraine isn't actually happening. And they're using footage and images from things that did actually happen, but are not at all related to the current conflict. So this is the kind of thing that you might see on social media, on TikTok, on Telegram, places like that. So one of the ways in which you could check to see if what you're looking at is true is that a lot of this has been fact-checked by organizations. So the News Literacy Project is a great organization. Reuters does fact-checking. USA Today does fact-checking. And all of these were fact-checked by great organizations. All right. I'm running a little bit out of time, but I'll just go through a couple of things, some of which we've already talked about some tips and tricks that you can employ. And a lot of these I talk about in my book, so you can read up more. But in a lot of the cases that I talked about and went through today, the first step in making sure that you don't fall victim to sharing things that are false is actually pausing before you share. Again, because of that emotion that we feel when we're seeing this content, or the desire to have like followers and get likes and clicks and stuff like that, we're sharing stuff that we don't even know if it's true or false. We're just sharing like as soon as we see it. But if we take that second to pause and look at what we're actually sharing and do a little bit of research before we do, we're going to find instances in which, the thing we were going to share actually isn't true. But that first step is really important to pause. The second thing to keep in mind is that memes aren't news. So you want to make sure that you are you understand that what you're seeing in front of you, like what category of thing does it fit into? Is it a video? Is it an image? Is it a meme? Or is it an article from an actual reputable news outlet? Those things are all different. And misinformation and disinformation, one of the reasons we fall for them so easily is that we see pictures or we see videos and we're like, proof, right? But as we talked about in some of these examples, they're not necessarily proof. They might have been taken out of context. So make sure that you can separate what is actually news from reputable sources and what is maybe something else. Tip number 3 is that likes and shares and number of followers doesn't actually make a person credible. It's really easy to think, well, this piece of content, this video or this image, everyone is sharing it, so it must be true, right? Or somebody who has a lot of followers is sharing it, so it must be true. And that's not actually correct. So I spend a lot of my time on Twitter. I have, a couple tens of thousands of followers on Twitter. And if you want my views on things like disinformation, misinformation, maybe foreign policy, national security, that kind of thing, I feel like I'm a fairly decent person to listen to, right? But if you want authoritative information on something like country music, you should not come to me for information about country music. I know nothing. Just because I have a lot of followers for one reason doesn't mean I'm an authoritative source on another topic, right? All right. Don't feed the trolls is tip number 6. So a lot of what is happening online, we like to engage with people online. One of the reasons we're all online is because it's cool to find community online. We can talk with others, that have similar interests. We can meet people we've maybe never had a chance to meet before. If you wanted to, chat with me, I'm online. How else would we have met otherwise, right? It's a really cool thing. But a lot of people are online and engage in a really not great style of interacting with people, trolling. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. You've probably even been targeted at some point or been hit up by a troll. And it's important to remember that people who are intentionally spreading false information, a lot of it will happen through trolling. They're trying to get attention. They're trying to get people to engage. They're trying to get people to share their content to help amplify and elevate their content. And so they'll pester you, they'll troll you, they'll harass you as a way of getting attention for themselves and for the content they're trying to share. And so I always say don't feed the trolls because they want that attention, they want that engagement because they want you to help them share their false information. And then the last thing is, and we can talk about this more maybe in the Q&A, is to steer clear of conspiratorial thinking. So when we have a lot of information flowing online and we start to feel like a lot of it is false, one of the interesting things that can happen, instead of us feeling more sort of certain about the good sources of information we found, we sometimes feel like maybe we can't trust anybody or anything. And that leads us down a path of what I call conspiratorial thinking. So thinking that instead of good sources of information like reputable news outlets and government agencies and things like that providing good information, instead we should listen to this YouTube account that has really, emotional and cool and funny ways of talking about things that we really like. And so, yeah, maybe we can talk about that a little bit more in the Q&A, but it's just something to be aware of when you start to feel like maybe you can't trust anything. Often our brains sort of go into that place of conspiratorial thinking instead. I should give a shout out to my friends at the News Literacy Project with whom I worked on this particular infographic. They're a really fantastic resource for parents, educators, librarians, and students who are listening in, and I encourage you to check them out. So let's see, one more slide. These are all the ways to find me on social media, and I look forward to maybe answering some questions. I know I threw a lot at you. We have a short amount of time together. We covered a lot, so happy to answer questions.
I'll ask a question, Cindy, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Other than Russia and Ukraine, what else right now do you in your field of work and whatnot, or on Twitterverse and whatnot, what other news or current event that's happening that you see as target of mis or disinformation that's being used as disinformation or misinformation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jose. Thank you. There are a lot. I would say every sort of major current event that's happening right now has some element of misinformation involved in it. So, and in fact, the paperback version of True or False is coming out soon, and I wrote an afterword trying to summarize the last 2 years since I wrote the hardback of the sort of major incidents of misinformation that have happened in 5 pages. And let me tell you, that was a challenge. So one of the biggest topics that has just been filled with misinformation is actually about the pandemic. So think about the pandemic. It is the perfect storm or the perfect setting for misinformation and disinformation to thrive. That's because it is an event that none of us have experienced in our lifetimes. We knew almost nothing about the virus and what it was going to do to us when it started to sort of take over our lives. There wasn't a cure yet, and we were all just terrified of this unknown. There was a lack of information, and that really creates that perfect storm. I remember, in the first few weeks of the lockdown, I mean, we had no idea. We had no idea what was happening. And there were rumors everywhere. People were seeing things in their communities that were otherwise very normal, but because of the lockdown and the virus, they were making, snap judgments about that thing actually being scary. So one specific example. So in your lovely state of California, there are a lot of military equipment movement via trains. So they move between bases to get equipment to different locations. And somebody posted a video showing this very normal movement of equipment on trains. And because there had been a lockdown at the same time, this person said, "Oh my gosh, the military is about to take over the country. We're all going to be, forced, to stay home and not go out. The military is, martial law is coming and the military is taking over." It was normal movement of equipment, but it caused this huge panic, right? There were also conspiracies and rumors about the treatments, what kind of treatments are effective and what aren't, what is not effective, the vaccines, and that sort of thing. So the pandemic has just been a huge area of misinformation. And because our understanding of the virus has been changing as we've been doing research, the information released to the public has also changed. And a lot of folks have taken that to mean, well, the government lied to us or the scientists lied to us because now the information or the instructions are different. When really that's how science works, right? Like if you think back to the day of that moon hoax that I talked about in the beginning, we didn't know what was on the moon at the time. We had no idea. And later our understanding of what was on the moon changed, especially when we were able to send, astronauts there to actually go and check it out for themselves. And so when it comes to scientific topics, our understanding and our knowledge of those issues changes. And that can be really uncomfortable for people. They think there's something more sinister going on there when really it's just how science works. Discovery just takes time. So that's been a huge issue. The election, the 2020 election, was a huge target of misinformation, similar to the example that I used earlier of that website of claiming fraud. That has continued to be a big narrative during the election and afterwards, and it's been rife with misinformation.
Thank you. So we have a question from the chat. Are there consequences for the spreading of disinformation at the global or federal level?
This is such a great question. Thank you for asking it. So it depends on the country. And I talk a little bit about it in True or False. One of the unfortunate outcomes of this topic becoming more prominent is that countries where they don't have democracies where they try to clamp down on things like press freedoms and human rights for their citizens, they've actually used this as an excuse to inflict greater punishments on their free press and on things like human rights workers, aid workers, and things like that. And so there have been some laws enacted in particular countries. Egypt is a good example, where they've passed legislation banning fake news or the creation of fake news when actually the government has used it to imprison journalists and limit free speech. So that has been one unfortunate consequence. And so I wouldn't say that that's it's a consequence, I suppose, but it's actually a really terrible consequence as a result. There's been some interesting movement recently on in the United States on defamation. So a lot of the misinformation about the 2020 election, people made claims on certain news outlets and talk shows and things like that, that a company that supplies voting machines that were used in the election were rigged. And think about it. You're the company that provides, working, functioning voting machines that are not compromised, but somebody is going out there and saying they've been compromised, this company is terrible, blah, blah, blah. That's a huge, huge issue for that company. And so the company actually decided to sue the people who spread those lies. And I think there's actually going to be some interesting legal precedents set in the next couple of years that sort of based on this example are used to prevent people from outright, knowingly spreading false information about particular, companies or prominent individuals.
Where is one of the more interesting places you've traveled to with your career?
There we go. I can answer that one. Sorry, not to sound very James Bondy, but that's all the specifics are classified. I have been lucky enough to do a lot of international traveling in my life. It's a passion of mine, and spent a lot of time living in various European countries, which was not bad. But some of my favorite places, I got to go to Jordan, and it is just a stunning, stunning country with so much history and just wonderful people. So I got to walk along the ancient trails to Petra in the middle of the desert. And, so I'm actually a wheelchair user. I use a wheelchair. And let me tell you how fun walking through like sand and cobblestone and like ancient crumbling rock in a wheelchair is, and being passed by camels, like people riding camels and things like that. It's a phenomenal country. Highly recommend traveling there if you ever get the chance. And then another fun one was I got to do a really, really, really cool trek through Peru, which is also just a stunning country with so many different landscapes. And I got to go to Machu Picchu and had a group of guys who, Machu Picchu is this, this ancient city essentially on top of a mountain peak. And there are no railings. There's nothing to keep you from falling to your death. And so I had a group of guys sort of carry me around up and down the steps and in the ruins of Machu Picchu. It was very cool.
I'll have, I guess, one more question. What piece of advice like that we can take every day? I know your book already talked about it and you talked about it, but like, what is there one thing that I know you already did your slide with the 3 tips, but what's another tip that we can take, as readers of information or what have you that can, I know you said pause, but is there anything else that we can do to like, oh, maybe this isn't correct or this is real?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I really just hope that people take away whenever I talk about this topic is that falsehoods online, it has an impact. It has a real world impact. I think, we see things on our phones, we see things on our computer, or on social media, just tons of hours every day. And it's really easy to think, oh, that's just an account on a screen. Oh, that's just a video. Oh, that's just, whatever. But these things that we're seeing do actually have a real world, in-person impact on people. The Gastonia example is kind of a fun one of like, the inconvenience of like driving a couple of hours and having your road trip sort of like disappointing in the end. That's on the very like low side of the like impact spectrum. But on the higher side of the impact spectrum, we're talking about impact during wartime. We're talking about people are making voting decisions about who they're going to elect, who they're going to vote for, who they want representing them in government based off of potentially false information. We have people making health decisions. One of the conspiracies that's been pushed surrounding the pandemic is this belief that the pandemic was created by 5G. And people were actually going out in the UK and trying to burn down and explode cell phone towers because they legitimately believed that cell phone towers caused COVID-19. So people are making real world offline decisions about what they're seeing online. And so you might think, oh, I'll just share it. We'll, find out later if it's true or false. Oh, it's not a big deal, right? Oh, this thing I shared ended up being wrong. Like, who's going to see it? Actually, a lot of people might see it, and it might actually make them decide to do something they weren't going to do before that actually affects them and eventually you. I have an example in my book that I talk about of somebody who, a businessman saw something. I don't want to like spoil it and all that because you can read about it, but a businessman saw something in Texas. He thought, well, this is interesting and out of the ordinary. It's probably this thing, this like total conspiracy thing. He posted it on his social media. He's like, I've got like, a dozen followers or whatever. Like if it ends up being wrong, who cares? Nobody's going to see it. The thing went viral. We all know we can go viral at any moment, right? The thing went viral. It is used as proof for a lot of different political conspiracy theories all these years later, even though the thing ended up being wrong. He later tried to retract it and say, I was wrong, this isn't true. I just like made a leap of judgment here. And it was too late. Like nobody cared when he went to correct the truth. And so that's something I hope everyone will take away from this and from True and False is like, this is actually really, really important and it's affecting people's lives.
So I have a lot of students here. I'm going to turn my camera on, sorry. I have a lot of students in my classes. I teach history, and I have a lot of students that really believe several conspiracy theories ranging from, I've had students in the past who told me they believe in the flat earth. I've had students talk, I'm talking right now. I had students talk about the MK Ultra experiments and stuff like that. And so it's just interesting, interacting with students these days with the cell phones. They're on their cell phones all the time. And so trying to explain some of these concepts is challenging. So do you have any suggestions in terms of just doing sort of research? Because I feel like we're just bombarded with information.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. And it's interesting because conspiracy theories, back in when I was a kid, conspiracy theories were fringe. It was like some random people believed some things like flat earth, and that was it. And now conspiracy theories have been mainstreamed, and a lot of it has to do with social media, and people who believe conspiracies are absolutely targeting student-aged individuals, particularly on places like TikTok and Snapchat, and exposing them to conspiracy theories that, again, were not believed in previous generations at this degree. I would say conspiracy theories, they're incredibly hard to disprove because they're not actually based in real evidence. So if I wanted to start a conspiracy theory tomorrow, I could totally do it. I could come up with like conspiracy that like, dogs are actually droids. There's actually one that somebody made up as a joke called "Birds Aren't Real." It's a total joke, by the way. Dogs are actually droids, right? I would go and Google dogs looking like robots. And there would be pictures. I haven't done it actually, but like there would be pictures of all the instances in dogs when dogs sort of don't really look real. And I would selectively take all the pictures that looked the most droidish and cobble together this whole story, this whole campaign, and say, see, proof. I found all of this proof. Well, what about the billions of pieces of content showing dogs are not robots, right? You're covering that up by cherry picking the couple of instances, right, that I can find in which a dog looks sort of unnatural or unreal. That's how conspiracy theories work. You make a claim and then you go look for evidence. And what do you know? If you go looking for it, you're going to find it. So that's how conspiracy theories work. It's really, really important to understand that that's the process. They're self-perpetuating claims, right? Like, if you want evidence of something, you can go find it. And then when you find it, you're like, aha, I was proved right. Well, you went to go look for it, right? So I think it's really important to understand and to teach as teachers that process, right? Like, how do conspiracy theories actually work? How do people actually set up conspiracy theories so that you can start to see the different ways in which the claims try to manipulate people and paint particular stories? The other thing, too, I would say, just really quickly about conspiracy theories, is there's a real, it's kind of like our obsession with true crime podcasts and shows. There's this sort of like solve the puzzle community, like let's all work together, investigate and find the answer, right? There's this follow this trail of breadcrumbs sort of mentality to it. And it's very community based, like, welcome to the club. You see the truth. Like, we're talking together. We're going to work together to find this truth together. And that sort of scratches an itch for a lot of people who maybe feel like they don't have a community and are also really excited by the idea of like investigating and discovery. I say that investigative mindset is awesome. However, use it to actually find the truth as opposed to fabricate, wild stories and conspiracy theories. That's why I teach so much the tips and tricks of investigating things that you see online, the actual tips and tricks, not the like do a keyword search or like a Google search for dogs that look like robots, to fabricate some proof for myself, right? But the actual skills of investigating.
Cool, thank you. My students really want to ask about Edward Snowden, but we ran out of time, so.
Another time.
All right. Well, Cindy, again, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for joining us. Thank you to the California State Library and the Institute of Museum Services for providing us this program. We do have free books still, of free copies of Cindy's book in our library if you have not yet received one. Just everyone research, look into information you find. There are so many false stories out there, but we don't want to be fooled. And so getting help from people like Cindy is so important. And so Cindy, thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for being here today. And just thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for all the information.
Thank you.